You know the story we're always told, right? When the economy grows, everybody wins. A higher GDP means progress, more production means a better life for everyone. It's pretty much the only number we ever hear about on the news.
But what if that whole idea is, well, wrong? What if a country's wealth can just soar, at least on paper, while for most of the people living there, nothing changes? Or worse, things actually get harder. That's the huge paradox we're going to unpack right now.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll expose the big lie. Then we'll get into what GDP completely ignores. After that, we'll look at the wild story of the Angola paradox and this whole idea of growth without jobs. And finally, we'll land on the real question we should all be asking.
All right, let's get right into it. The big lie. This is all about how our favorite economic number, the one we see in every single headline, might be totally misleading us about what's actually happening in the real world.
Here it is. This is the single most important thing to get from all of this. GDP does not equal development. Let me say that again, because it's that important. GDP is not development. They are two totally different things.
So, if it's not development, what is it? Well, GDP, gross domestic product, just adds up the dollar value of everything a country produces and sells. It's a measure of economic activity. Think of it like a giant national cash register, just tallying up sales. But, and this is the key, it doesn't care who's spending the money or who's getting rich from it.
And that leads us to the heart of the problem. Everything that this one little number leaves out. And we're not talking about small details here. We're talking about massive blind spots that can completely hide the truth.
You see, GDP is a one-trick pony. It only adds. It never, ever subtracts. So if a factory pollutes a river to make its products, GDP goes up. But it doesn't go down to account for, the dead river. It doesn't care if all the new wealth goes to a few billionaires while everyone else gets poor. It doesn't ask the most basic questions. Who owns this economy? And who is really benefiting from all this so-called growth? And this is how you get a major disconnect. A country can strike oil and boom, its GDP goes to the moon. But that doesn't mean you'll see better schools or hospitals or higher wages for regular people. In fact, these two things, GDP growth and living standards, can actually move in completely opposite directions. Just look at food, for example. Between 2010 and 2022, the world's food supply grew by 21%. In that same time, the population only grew by 15%. We make way more food than we need for every single person on Earth. So the problem isn't production, which is what GDP measures. The problem is distribution, which is something GDP is completely blind to.
And this brings us to a perfect and kinda tragic real-world example, the Angola paradox. On paper, this country looked like an absolute economic miracle. But for the people living there, the story was very, very different. So after a long civil war ended in 2002, Angola's oil money started flowing and its economy just exploded. For over a decade, it was one of the fastest-growing economies in the entire world. A huge success story, right? Well, not so fast. By 2018, its inequality score was one of the worst on the planet, and today, even with all that wealth, more than half of all Angolans still live in poverty. That one number tells the real story. 51.3. That's Angola's Gini score, which is how we measure inequality. Basically, 0 is perfect equality and 100 is perfect inequality. Anything over 50 is considered extremely high. This number proves that all that money from the GDP boom, it didn't get shared. It got concentrated at the very top. And believe me, Angola is not some one-off case. Take a look at Equatorial Guinea. If you just look at GDP per person, it's one of the richest countries in Africa, all thanks to oil. But again, that national wealth has absolutely not translated into a better life for most of its people.
It's pretty shocking when you see it laid out like this. In Equatorial Guinea, the richest 10% of people consume over 11 times more than the poorest 10%. That gap is just staggering. It's a crystal clear picture of an economy where natural resource money flows straight to a tiny elite and just bypasses everyone else.
Now, this whole disconnect isn't just about who gets the money. It's also about jobs. Because even when GDP is climbing, it's no guarantee of stable work. And for this, we need to look at the reality in Nigeria. Get this. Even though Nigeria is Africa's largest economy, a mind-boggling 93% of its workers are in what's called the informal sector. That means they're self-employed or in jobs with zero security, no benefits, no sick days, no stability. The formal sector, jobs with contracts and a steady paycheck, that's just a tiny 7% sliver.
So you can have all the GDP growth you want, but if it's not creating real secure jobs, is it actually helping anyone?
And look, this isn't just a story about a few countries in Africa. This is a global pattern. It's a fundamental flaw in how we think about success and progress everywhere.
So what do? We have to stop just nodding along when we see a headline about GDP. We need to start asking much smarter questions. Like, who actually owns the companies driving this growth? Are the profits staying in the country to build schools and roads, or are they just flowing out to foreign accounts? And the biggest one of all, who is actually feeling the benefits of this growth in their everyday lives?
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? GDP is a measure of size, not quality. It's a ruler, not a report card. It tells you nothing about fairness or inclusion or whether any of this can even last. And when we get obsessed with just making that one number go up, we can end up chasing all the wrong things. Which leaves us with one last simple question. The next time you hear that a country's economy is growing, I want you to just pause for a second and ask yourself, growing for who? Because if that growth isn't for the many, then it's not really development. It's just a number.